Hi, this is Todd. Here again with another video demonstrating the profiles I use for mixing and mastering. And today I'm going to do that using a simple swing intro. It's a short demo I use for my steel guitar in Contact. So to start off here, I'd like to explain what these three tracks are and how I use them. They're in all my mixing and mastering projects, and they play a big role in the process. So starting with this track, the Submaster, all the tracks in the project that are part of the mix will end up on this Submaster track, which goes to the Master Effects and then on to the Master track. And since all the tracks in the mix go to this Submaster track, it's controlling the levels of the whole mix before it hits the Master Effects. In other words, it also controls how hard I hit the Master Effects. Okay, so now let's talk about the profiles. But before we do, I'd like to show you what my studio looks like. I have what's called a LEDE control room, which stands for Live and Dead End. They became very popular back in the 70s and 80s, and I built mine in 1979. You can see the speakers appear to be mounted in the walls, but to avoid resonance in the walls, they're actually suspended and floating. So they're not actually touching any part of the wall. If they were mounted in the walls, it would cause smearing in the low end, and that's not very good for mixing and mastering. And being an LEDE control room, the front end is very dead while the back end is live and built to refract the sound. There's a lot of ways to refract the sound, but when I built my studio, they were very expensive, and there were only a few available. So as you can see here in this picture, I opted to use splays on my back wall, which is also split and angled so that it's unparalleled to the front of the room, and it works very well. I might add that there are no parallel walls or surfaces at all in my control room. Okay, so now let's get on with the profiles. Up here in tracks 1 and 2, we have two separate profiles. Each profile is the average of 5 or 6 different country songs that I thought sounded very good. Now you might ask why I use country songs. The reason I do is because, unlike many other styles, they seem to cover the full frequency range very, very well. However, I do have a few other profiles too, for the Beatles and Steely Dan, as well as Fleetwood Mac and the Eagles, and a few others as well. But with these two profiles, I've found I can mix and master most any style, with quite a bit of confidence. Of course, these profiles are not magical tools. Your ears are still the most important tool you have. But these profiles are a great help to visualize what you're hearing, and they can also be a great tool, not only for learning frequencies, but also teach you how to use various plugins, especially EQ. So now let's move on to these two profiles. They're both sine sweep files, and in this case they're only 3 seconds long, but they do cover the full 20 to 20K frequency range. And when we play them, you can see there's not a lot of difference between them, but I found there's enough here to help fashion most any of my mixes. So now let's get to the mix of this short steel guitar demo. I thought it would be a good one for this demonstration because it is so short. You can see here, the mids and high mids could be brought up some, and these highs could come up some too. And down here at the bottom, it appears to be a little high. But before we start EQing or mastering, let's take a look at these two tracks. This sub-instruments track has all the backing tracks. In other words, the drums, bass, piano, and acoustic guitar will all end up on this track. And this track has the steel. Both of these two tracks go to the Submaster track, then the Master Effects. So let's bring up this span and take a look at the two tracks. The red line is the steel, and the green line is the backing instruments. And as we can see here, it seems to be a little low in the mids and highs. So let's mute the steel and just play the backing tracks. It does look like the mids and highs could be a little low. So let's open up this EQ I have on this sub-instrument track. And you can see here I'm compensating for the mids and highs. And looking at band number 1, I've got a plus 4.1 dB at 558 Hz, with a bandwidth of 1 octave, which takes care of this area. Then on band number 2, I've got a plus 5 dB at 2 kHz and a bandwidth of 1.26, and that affects this area. So let's unbypass this backing track and play it again, and this time I'll show the comparison in this span. You can see the difference the 2 bands of EQ made here, and I think it's put some clarity into the backing track and sweetened it up some. But let's play it again, and this time I'll play part of it with no EQ and then play it with EQ to get a better comparison. Well, I think it sounds a little better with EQ, and it's also going to smooth the mix out some for mastering. So let's unmute the steel and move on to the master effects. As I look at the 2 profiles, I'm going to use this bottom one because I think it matches the curve a little better, and I think this little intro is sounding pretty good already. So as we examine this curve, we can see a little dip here just above the 1K area, as well as another dip here in the 4K area. And as we take a look at band 4 in this Master Effects EQ, I have it set at 1.13K with a gain of 3.8 dB. Also, you can see here, it's quite narrow. So I've got the bandwidth set at 0.3, which is just short of a 3rd octave. And here in band 5, I've got it set at 4.15K with a gain of 3.6, and it also has a broader bandwidth set to 0.7 octaves. Moving on down the curve, we have a little hump here around 190 Hz, but it's the snare, and I think the snare sounds okay. And here at 138, we have a little dip, so I've added 4 dB with a small bandwidth of 0.3 octaves. Now let's look at the bottom end here. It's got quite a sweep. And as you can see here with band 1, I've got a low shelf at 60 Hz with a minus 11.4 dB of gain. I've also brought the bandwidth down to make it a little tighter. So let's play it now and see what we get. Well, that brought it down, but now we have a dip here centered right around 65 Hz. Now I could bring band 1 up a bit, but I like the way it looks down here at the very bottom. So instead I've got band 2, and as you can see, I've got 5.5 dB of gain at 65 Hz with a bandwidth of 0.62. So now let's see what we get. Okay, it's a little high here, but I like how it sounds. So I'm going to call this little intro mixed, mastered, and done. And now that it's done, I'd like to point something out. As you can see, the curve doesn't perfectly match the profile. It doesn't have to, and really never will. They're only to be used as an approximation. And if used properly, they can be a big help in getting better mixes and masters. Well, that's it for now, and have a great day.